industry a bit, but really drill into an issue that is facing all of us in the hospitality industry. We want to bring everybody up to speed and let you know what we're doing and what you can do to help your members and everybody that has restaurants or any sort of hospitality business in your area. On the phone with me today, and I'm just looking at the Hollywood Squares here from our team, Lauren Simon. Say hello, Lauren, or wave. You want to say a word?
Hi. Yes, my name is Lauren Simon, and I am the membership growth and engagement manager over Northeast Ohio and East Ohio region. So over the last few months, I started in February. I've gotten to know Cleveland really well. I am a Columbus native, but I am a Browns fan. So, and I do love the city of Cleveland. I love Northeast Ohio. It's been really fun getting to know of the different restaurants and different neighborhoods and different identities and Lebanese American. So it's been really cool to see lots of different foods. Columbus food scenes, not as fun or cool. So it's been really cool to see Ohio and East Ohio and all of the differences. And I love all of the culture there. So very happy to be here. And if you are a member, I'm your person, I'm your contact, I'm here, I'm happy to help. If not a member, we would love for you to be a member and I would be your person.
Great, thank you, Lauren.
Yeah.
Our speakers today are myself, President and CEO of the Restaurant Hospitality Alliance, Andy Piccolantano, who is our Managing Director of Membership and Business Development, and Todd Bowen, Managing Director of External Affairs and Government Relations. That's your lineup for today. And we're going to go ahead and get rolling here. We'll give you a couple different updates. Andy's going to take you through a little bit about what we are, just so everybody's grounded in what the Alliance is and a few things about the industry. And then we'll jump right into digging into federal issues and then this ballot initiative threat that is facing Ohio. And then I'll bring it together with what is our strategy and what are we trying to do about it. We'll try to get through this briskly, this within the hour. And then if there's any questions, we can certainly make time for that. So I will turn it to Andy and take it away, Andy.
Thanks, John. Appreciate everybody being here. Came to the ORHA. I spent 14 years with the Ohio Chamber of Commerce. I was a small business owner before that. So really appreciate what all of you do. Seen it firsthand. We couldn't do what we do without our connections and partnerships with chambers, CVBs, state. In addition to urging prospects to join the ORHA, there's one other thing that my team always mentions, and that they should engage with their local chamber if they haven't already. Again, appreciate you all being here today. We move into next year, engage a little bit more into topics for next year, how we can engage and maybe do some in-person events, all those types of things. So stay tuned on that as well. So I'd like to just point out, are we engaging in this tip wage issue? What is our role in it? And this I'd like to help table a little bit on that. So are we even able to do the advocacy that we provide and the services that we provide, which you can see in front of you here. The one thing I would point out that I'm going to give a little more detail on today is data, something that so many of our operators don't have at their hands, the smaller operators in particular. They don't have access to good data, to demographics, to advocacy. So understanding how laws affect them, that is what we spend a large part of our time. Keep going to the next. I think, John, are you control the slides, I think?
Yep, just tell me when to go.
Thank you, sir. I can do like a ding, like the old
like the typewriter, yeah.
A little bit about the industry. So these are updated here. So there's almost 25,000 eating and drinking places in the state of Ohio. Amounts to over $33 billion in sales. We about 10,000 of those locations in our organization. We've been around for 104 years now. We've had some time to collect members over the years. And as you can imagine, we get any number of questions from these members. Todd always likes to point out that there are, when we meet with elected leaders across the state, they always ask us a couple of things. How many members do you have? And then they want to know, is XYZ restaurant a member in my district? Because it hits home when you can talk about up to date, personal to them, rather than just we're the Ohio Restaurant and Hospitality Alliance. That a huge difference when it comes to advocacy. You can go to the next one, John. We have over 564,000 jobs or employees in the industry. That's a full 10% of employment in the state overall. And by 2030, we projected 585,000 jobs. I like to point out that that does not include the Intel plant that's coming into town in Ohio. So we think that'll probably push past 600,000 jobs for sure. And then the next slide will talk about just a little bit more about the that are generated in the industry. For every dollar spent in a restaurant, that's over $2 to the state's economy. And for every $1 million that's spent in Ohio's restaurants and hospitality locations, that's almost 20 jobs to the state's economy. So a huge driver. So when I talked about data, we state, federal, or state national data, the operator surveys every quarter, and we ask for the same so we can keep tracking these. Anyone who's familiar with the industry is probably not going to be surprised by some of these numbers. Food costs, labor costs, menu pricing, those are all top of the list for operators, and now tip wage. How will that affect all of those other three pieces? Absolutely will affect those in there. Then nationally, so this is tricky to read, but we are approaching going past $1 trillion in revenue for the industry as a whole. That was before COVID, we were ready to go past $1 trillion, and then that gut punch that was COVID set us back a few years. So here we are now, readjusting, heading back up. So then we are looking at, so again, back to the data nationally, these are some new numbers out. And I think this is all sets the table, no pun intended, this sets the table to understand why we think the tip wage issue, passage of that be so devastating. Restaurants and overall in the economy, consumers, we're all still recovering. We haven't come all the way back. So something else that could damage us without having come all the way back, that's going to be, double bad.
On this one too, that real disposable income, that is the choice people make. You know what I mean? It's not even the basics of, just food and shelter. That is, I'm going to go out, I'm going to go on vacation, I'm going to use, some entertainment, stop at a park and spend money and things like that. That looks like, based on the data coming out of government, and as we put all this together at 1.7%, you can see that's down a bit from 2023. So those are the signals that we're keeping an eye on.
Yep. And in here, economic growth, you can see 2.6% that off the bat could be. And if you only looked at that, you'd say, okay, things are fine. But if you go to the next slide, I was just talking about with disposable income, that's a concerning figure right there, the drop there. Good news for our operators is that 90% of Americans have said they will spend their disposable income in restaurants. So when you think of people go out to dinner and something, it's not the dinner or lunch, there's always food involved, usually in what they go out for. So they're looking for an experience. So restaurants do well in addition to good food, good service. There's another experience that they can, and inflation. This is John's favorite slides, because it's there's a misunderstanding. You hear about inflation going away. Inflation has gone down, but it has not gone away. We haven't gone back to where we have been in the past. So you can see that it spiked at 8%. Now it's at 3.2%, but that is still too high. And that is still the wallet crunch. Consumers, you're already facing inflation, mortgage rates, interest rates, student loan interest rate going to go up next year again, I think to 6.5%, I think I heard. So consumers are already facing that. Operators are facing higher costs in their own restaurants. So, think of the things together. It's not a good.
Andy, that's not my favorite slide. That one of the lobster meal that's coming up, that's my favorite slide.
We'll get the Red Lobster quick. I think they might have some deals going on. So then when we look at growth in labor, so this is what the average hourly earnings are for restaurant employees. this is this is what the market dictates. This is not artificial. This is what if this is market can bear at this point. So these are good numbers that those are up. And I would point out that this is a fun fact. It takes 12 employees in a restaurant to generate $1 million in sales. And to put that in perspective, it takes 4 in retail, a clothing store, and 3 grocery store. So when you think about in a tip that Todd will talk about, if somebody has 24 employees and they have to cut, say, 12 of them to try and make ends meet from a payroll, also lost $1 million in sales. So there's a sliders are no matter what you do. It's very much a P&L situation there. And Chairman Mitchell, who I'm sure you're all familiar with, he is over that restaurants have already hit as much as they can bear as far as costs go, setting menu prices. So we've already hit the ceiling on costs, pricing, and then add in labor costs, higher food costs with inflation. Restaurants really don't have anywhere to go. The profit margins are razor thin as it is. So even with McDonald's, that they had Q4 earnings that were higher, but even adjusting with $5 value meals to try and get people back in. And I know Wendy's just fired back with $3 value meals, basically lost leaders just to try and get people back into the stores. But I'll end on a positive here. So how are operators still, how are they? We mentioned experience earlier. They really are. There's the experience, in addition to just, the basics, the service, all of those things that they should be doing and not to be taken for granted. Trying to retain talent, which is, I think, 30%. That's the number one issue right now with restaurateurs is retaining talent. So finding those HR solutions. So total rewards, making sure their folks feel valued, making sure that using technology doesn't have to be expensive, but when you're looking at the potential of becoming more efficient, that is absolutely a go. And then costs. Restaurants are looking at their menus almost every day, trying to figure out how to adjust those and make sure that they are not wasting any of their resources. So these are things that we help with folks, our members, every day on. So with that, and if you have any other questions, please let me know. Happy to follow up if you want to know any more detail on these things, or even if you want to know a little bit more about what's going on in your area, chat with you. So I appreciate the time, and I'll turn it over here back to John.
Thank you, Andy. And Andy spoke to a lot of things that just got covered at the National Restaurant Show in Chicago. And we have about 440 attendees from the state of Ohio that went to the National Restaurant Show. And that show is everything you possibly imagine for the industry: new technology, new trends, new food, new processes, HR, all that. And it was very interesting. Our industry continues to evolve rapidly. I was wondering where Todd was. I see they're sharing a computer now, so good to see you, Todd.
I'm trying to be efficient, John.
Okay. All right, take it away, John.
Yeah, thanks, John. In the middle of the Zoom, my computer just did a random restart. So I'm going to start with a little discussion about some of the federal issues that we are focusing on. And part of this is just both a reminder to myself and everyone else that even while we have this real significant threat to our industry, we have to stay on top of all of the other government affairs things that we always need to do and push the ball forward. So these are just some federal issues that we're very focused on right now. One is this joint employer rule. This is a proposal by the National Labor Relations Board on joint employer. And joint employer traditionally has been something aimed at the franchisor-franchisee model that would create responsibility for the franchise or for any labor violations or others that the franchisee might experience. But what I've been told by some labor attorneys is this one is so broadly and poorly written that as a business owner, you could even have some both legal and employer responsibility for any vendor you might have come into your business, whether it's a computer vendor or someone coming in to clean your business. So that's one we're pushing back on robustly. The other one is this FTC rule, and this is the FTC. It started maybe as a good idea where they were looking at concerts and some of the cell phones where you might get your bill and see all these what they call hidden charges. But of course, as the government often does, is the more they talk about it, the broader it got and the more out of control it got. And now they're including some like general fees that are common practice in like a delivery fee or a large party fee, and saying that those could be banned. So we're pushing back significantly on that. The Credit Card Competition Act, that is just one where we know as retailers and restaurant owners that those swipe fees continue to go up. So this is something that would bring some additional competition into that credit card swipe fee. And then the tax bill, that's what we're playing offense on. There are some strong provisions in there that would help with both business deductibility, expensing, and provisions. It passed the House. It's now moving on to the Senate, so we're pushing hard on that. And then, John, if you want to go to the next slide. As we talk about this ballot initiative threat, what I want to do is I'll talk through what the threat is, who it is that's pushing this threat, and then some things that the ORHA is doing to be prepared, and some ways that you can get involved. And next slide. So what is this threat? And every time I talk about this, I make sure that I talk about this is not a threat just facing restaurants. This is a threat facing all of Ohio's businesses, servers, workers, and others in the hospitality industry and the communities we serve. So there is a group out there gathering signatures to put an amendment on Ohio's that would fast track Ohio's starting entry-level wage rate by $4.55 in just 14 months. Which is a very significant, that's a 43% increase in just 14 months. And importantly to the hospitality industry, it would eliminate the tipped wage. They are currently trying to gather signatures to put this on the ballot this November. The group that is pushing this is called One Fair Wage Nationally, operating in Ohio as Raise the Wage Ohio. And I'll talk a little bit more about who they are and who backs them on a couple of slides coming up. So what exactly are they? I said it's $4.55 in 14 months. What it does is it would starting already indexed to inflation entry-level wage rate. Every time I talk about this, I make sure that I mention that Ohio's starting entry-level wage rate is not one of those, it's not the federal one that's stagnated and has not moved in decades. We are indexed to inflation, so we go up every year, but this would fast track it. So it would become, if this were to get on the ballot and then pass, the minimum wage in Ohio would go to $12.75 starting on January 1st of 2025, then immediately to $15 an hour in 2026, then would go back to being indexed to inflation. In other states where they've won what they call the fight for 15, immediately this group starts pushing for 22 as the next wage rate that they're pushing for. And then on the tipped wage, it would begin immediately squeezing the tipped wage so that would be eliminated fully January 1st, 2029. Although when I look at it, the tip credit or the difference between the tipped wage and the full minimum in the last 2 years is so small that I think a lot of restaurants would go ahead and just it virtually eliminates it in just over 2 years. I mentioned One Fair Wage. They are a national group. They are based out of Massachusetts. Their CEO is a professor at Berkeley. They are actively in the signature gathering phase. They have to gather just shy of 414,000 valid signatures of registered Ohio voters across 44 of Ohio's 88 counties. They have to submit them to the Secretary of State by July 3rd. If they are successful and they do have the right number of certified signatures, this would go on the ballot in 2024, and as an amendment to Ohio's Constitution would only need 50% plus one to pass and become a part of Ohio's Constitution. I mentioned One Fair Wage. They operate nationally. Their latest thing that they're putting is this elimination of the tipped wage, but they have been driving kind of anti-business practices, not always aimed at the industry, but significantly aimed at the hospitality industry for years. And next slide. Where do they get their money from? They get some of their money from kind of traditional progressive donors, but they also are most significant financial backer is the SEIU. They're trying to push sectoral bargaining and bring unionization to restaurants and full service restaurants. They know that tipped workers do not make likely union members, which is one reason they're so focused on eliminating this tipped wage. Next slide. So one of the things we've seen and that we would be afraid of here in Ohio is some of the other things that might come through the constitutional amendment ballot initiative process if they're successful here. In some other East Coast, West Coast states, we've seen a spread of this predictive scheduling, which is where you have to give your schedule 2 or 4 weeks in advance. And if you deviate from it at all, you have labor violations. And even if they are things that are for the employees, if the change is, it violates the predictive scheduling rules. Another thing that they're working significantly on is some even more onerous joint employer liabilities. And sectoral bargaining is something that they've pushed for. We've seen that in California, where they're trying to push that instead of having to go and unionize kind of one restaurant or one business at a do a whole sector at a time. So we're afraid they would come back for those things in Ohio via constitutional amendment if we don't fight back and put a stake in the ground and win this one. So next slide, John. I'm going to get a little bit in the weeds. Oh, I'm sorry. I got ahead of myself. They are not just gathering signatures. They are come to Ohio and are trying to do some earned media, primarily in our bigger cities, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus, where they've tried to hold some rallies and have tried to get the mayors involved with them. We have also really made sure that we've met with the leaders in these cities and what the tipped wage is. And we're having reasonable success with that as well. So I'm going to get a little bit in the weeds on what the tipped wage is. One of the questions I get all the time is why Ohio? It is because we do have a ballot initiative process where our Constitution can be amended via these outside, relatively easy. We are one of the 10 easiest states to gather signatures to put something on the ballot, and then our Constitution can be changed with just a 50% +1 vote. So I always make sure that I do a set on what the tipped wage is, because I do a lot of these talks that always to folks in the hospitality industry, and kind of everybody kind of understands that there is tipped wage credit, but it is the ability for businesses that employ regularly and customarily tipped employees to pay a wage rate less than the full minimum wage. Now in Ohio, that is set at half of the full minimum wage. It's also indexed to inflation, so it does go up every year. And every time I talk about this, I make sure that I say that employers are and always have been legally obligated. The tips do not make the employee up to the full minimum wage, that they have to make them whole. Other side will sometimes talk about a minimum wage or try to say that servers don't earn the minimum wage. That is not, nor has ever been true. Employers have always had this legal obligation. Now, the other thing that is also true is that employers, so very rarely that I could almost say never, but I probably can't, because I'm sure that one could find an instance or two, do they have to make them up to that? Because servers in Ohio do very well. $27 an hour is the average server hourly wage rate in Ohio with their tips. And when you bell curve that out, 90% of servers are between $19 and $41 an hour. So on the top end, servers do really well. And on the bottom end, they do, at the $19 an hour, they do even better than this $15 an hour that the one flat wage group is pushing. So this is just exactly where are we in the process. The one fair wage is gathering the signatures. If they're successful by July 3rd, and they do have a cure period if they come a little bit short. So probably the month of July would be spent going back and forth on the signatures. Then a real campaign would start in August. It would go to a public vote. And if they're successful, it would immediately raise the minimum wage and begin the elimination of the tipped wage. They are not just trying to do this in Ohio. There are several states that they're trying to do this in. In fact, they've said they would like to do this in 24 states by 2026. This map shows the ones that they are most actively engaged in right now. In some of these states, they're trying to do it via ballot initiative like they are here in Ohio. In some other states, they're trying to do it through the state legislature. And then in others, they'll go municipality by municipality and put this on the ballot in the municipality and do it in just one city at a time. And Washington, D.C. is the most recent municipality where they have been successful in this. So a couple of slides here on what has this meant for the city of Washington, D.C. This is on how did operators say they're going to deal with this? And many said that they would decrease the number of tipped employees. They might open future locations in the suburbs, or they might have to close a location. And many say, and now this is becoming true, that they would implement an automatic service charge. So when you go to a restaurant, it might say automatic gratuity for parties of 8 or more. Now in many Washington, D.C. restaurants, that's true, but it's for parties of 1 or more. The one thing that I always make sure that I point out when I talk about that, if it's on the bill automatically, even if it's termed a gratuity, by law, it does not belong to the servers in the same way that's a voluntary gratuity that the customer writes onto the bill. So it doesn't go directly to the servers, it goes to the house. Now, they may use some of that to offset their labor costs, but they can use it for anything they would like. And because it's treated differently tax-wise, it ends up being a lose-lose-lose. It's problematic for the servers because they get lower tip wage. It's problematic for the restaurants because of the way it's treated. And it's problematic for diners because diners hate this idea of an automatic gratuity. And then what do customers say that they're doing in Washington, D.C.? 40% are eating out less, eating at home more, and 1 in 3 D.C. diners say that they're eating out in the suburbs more. So these things that we believe to be true have come true in Washington, D.C. in the 6 months since this has been implemented, and it's still being phased in. So these numbers will probably get worse as we go forward. 3,700 full-service restaurant jobs have left the city of Washington, D.C., and the suburbs that have not eliminated the tipped wage have added 1,700 full-service restaurant jobs. So the reason we talk about this so much is because this is what we're afraid would happen in Ohio if this were implemented. The other thing that is true in Washington, D.C. is that servers are getting less tips. The example on here is from an IHOP server who used to earn $120 to $160 a night, but now that the tipped wage has been eliminated, his average is $80 to $110 a night. I just always talk a little bit about this because some people will bring up this idea of tip fatigue to me. And, are people kind of tired of tipping? And it was done that said 93% of Americans support the idea of tipping in the traditional manner, in a full-service sit-down restaurant where you're tipping for service. Where there is tip fatigue is what I refer to as transactional tipping. And that's like if you go to the airport and you go to the cooler, you get the bottle of water, you probably scan it yourself, and then they flip the screen around and there's a request for a tip. That's where tipping fatigue is. There is not tipping fatigue in the traditional restaurant setting. And this is one, I mentioned this at the beginning, but every time I talk about this, I want to make sure that people do not perceive this as just a problem for restaurant owners and operators, because I think it's fairly evident that if you're tripling front of house labor costs while increasing all other labor costs, that's going to be problematic for those businesses. It's also problematic for servers and bartenders, and we've got some recent survey results that we'll talk about as we go forward. Servers and bartenders make less money when the tip goes away. Customers lose. Menu prices have to go up. We've got a count on our website. It's between 20 and 30% that menu prices have to go up to account for this. So customers are paying more. And because in a lot of instances you have fewer servers, their service is probably less good than it was before, and they're paying more for it. It hurts communities. If you think about it, a hospitality community, a cool restaurant, a cool brewery, are things that make a smaller mid-sized city in Ohio really vibrant and thriving, and anything that hurts hospitality businesses hurts those communities that those hospitality businesses. It'd also be devastating for Ohio's economy. Think about this, especially if this is happening in Ohio and our surrounding states are not faced with the same threat. That would really hurt Ohio's economy at a time where we have some good things happening. So this would be really problematic for our whole state. We have done some voter polling on this, and I won't get too in the weeds on this, but what the polling says is that when the conversation is solely about should the rate be $15 an hour or should not, it starts with that having a lead. But when we educate people on threats to the tipped wage, on the threats to smaller mom and pop businesses, and we get those small businesses and servers and bartenders involved in telling the story, that gives us a path toward winning in November should be successful in getting their signatures. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to John to talk a little bit about some of the progress that we've made on gathering resources, telling the story, and then we'll end with telling you how you can get more involved with us. So back to you, John.
All right. Todd is getting really good at doing this without breathing. So nice job. As Todd mentioned, we really put together a sound on this. We call it our multiple plan, and we won't get into everything here, but we'll hit some highlights that all the pieces that we're working on and try to do this pretty quickly. But the tactics are really starts with this, trying to make sure there's tremendous awareness with all the stakeholders that matter in this, the restaurants themselves, the people that work there, all of us that have some kind of support for the industry, business groups, all that, so that, you know, we're all kind of up to speed on this. I'll take you some of the things we've done. We have done literally countless meetings with companies around Ohio to make sure that these larger companies are really up to speed on this, because they have, in some cases, hundreds, if not thousands of employees in some of these big restaurant groups. And we continue to kind of work through this between Todd, myself, Andy, Lauren, and membership team. We continue to work through that, and we will continue to do that where we find there's no company that is not up to speed on this in the restaurant industry. We do bring together groups, restaurant operators. We have a thing called the Local Restaurant Alliance in our different cities, and we bring folks together and kind of take them through a version of this presentation to specifically what the audience is. We meet with some of our sister organizations like the Ohio Craft Brewers, because they are obviously very tied into this. They have a lot of tipped employees in craft brewing. We've done tons of meetings with servers and bartenders where we gather them together, and we bring in a couple experts to give us a hand on this. The Restaurant Workers of America is made up of servers who have been fighting this in other states and jurisdictions. The Restaurant Workers of America, they are servers. They have formed a group, and they come in and talk to our servers about what they've seen in other states and cities where this has been pushed, in Washington, D.C., where it's been passed, and what the negative impacts have been so far on it. It's been very helpful, I think, for people to hear all that, and we'll continue to do that. We put together some videos from those meetings, and won't play them here this morning, but you can go to protecttipsohio.com, and those videos play on that site when you get there, and you can see right out of the lips of people who are bartenders and servers who kind of walk through why they're in this industry and why tip credit would be very problematic for them. Todd mentioned that we've done a lot of work research with different groups on this, and we just completed a survey of bartenders and servers across Ohio. Excuse me, that was completed by a professor from Carnegie Mellon University. And on just this week, on May 21st, we held a press conference where we had the media from really across the state come either in person or now, of course, like this via Zoom to listen to the results of that. And let me show you the highlights coming out of that. I think the most important thing is this is a very strong and deep survey. 990 respondents. It had about a 3%, potential error rate, but meaning that it's a lot, right? Most of these surveys have been done like this in other states on this very topic. They've got about 300 to 400 responses. So we had just a kind of a blowout top. The key takeaway on this said they want to keep the current system that has a base wage and the ability to earn more than the minimum wage via tips. Most of them say they can maximize their tips through customer services, which is why they're in the industry. It's why they choose to be in hospitality. If you're not good at this and you don't like to do it, you can work for a quick serve restaurant, or you can work for a fast casual restaurant where you just get paid the hourly rate. You don't have to work on tips at all. So very flexible in this industry. About 70% of them said they can make more money in this job than they can in other sectors. And we'll show you kind of the bell curve on what they're doing. And men really choose it because of the incredible flexibility that you get when you work in the industry. You can work in the morning, you can work at lunch rush, you can work at evenings, you can work in a bar in the evening, and you can make really good money at all that. This is the dispersion of how people are the incomes that they're generating being tip workers, and them are making more than $20 per hour, and 64 are making more than $25 to more than 40. And those ones out to the far right are typically your, higher end casual dining restaurants or your fine dining restaurants. It's interesting, even the mom and pops, you can see that, most of them at sort of that medium on this, median ought to be about $27 an hour. We point all this out. We wanted to have real data on this because the opposition is saying that individuals who are tip workers are making a sub minimum wage and that they're making, somewhere around $7 or $8 total. That couldn't be further from the truth. There's no data that would support that at all. We now have factual data coming from people in this industry. We want to make sure we had this to make sure that we're all very clear on facts. 85% of servers and bartenders believe this is important. The customers are unlikely to continue on top of any kind of mandatory service charge, which is what operators would have to do to cover these much higher labor costs. And 91% said that they would earn less under this new system. You can see that image there with service charge. Many restaurants would put that on. The customer would see that and think, well, that's the tip. I don't need to tip on top of that. And that's what we've seen in other states and jurisdictions. So just want to make sure we're really clear on the risk to that. We've met with many chambers, CVBs across state, and thank you, Cindy, for bringing together this group. We really appreciate that. We'll continue to do that. We've been really across the state meeting with some of them individually, but obviously when we get a group like this together, it's helpful. And I know we're taping this so folks can kind of watch this when they get an opportunity. We've imagine getting our suppliers and vendors on board with this, because there's a gigantic risk for them. If their restaurants are under pressure, meaning that they have much lower profitability or they have to pull back hours, lower revenues, they have to raise prices, all those are going to put tremendous pressures backwards through the supply chain and hurt the businesses of many of these great suppliers you see here. So we've been meeting with them and really pressing to make sure they understand the risk. And so they're going to help us with this process, as you can imagine. We've met with a lot of elected officials on this. It's important to make sure that we have them all understanding this risk to the state, to this gigantic industry. And we'll continue to do that to make sure that everybody understands this, and at the appropriate time asking for their support. You'll see more on that as we move forward. We've generated very specific websites on this. Protect Tips Ohio is our general website. When you land there, there are drop downs for operators, there drop downs for bartenders, and there's now a very detailed site for the news media, because we're beginning to really press that. We had just tremendous news media coverage coming out of our event this week, and you'll start to see those stories proliferate and continue to proliferate, because we're going to keep pushing that information. Todd mentioned another thing on our website is the tip wage elimination financial calculator, which so many of our operators did. And immediately when they saw that and they ran the numbers, they saw they would need to increase their prices around 20 to 30% to be whole. And then we created a much more detailed and I call a sophisticated model for our operators to go through, which allows them to kind of take an entire P&L, all the elements of their profit statement, and get into much more detail in terms of what would be the impact on various lines on the labor line, which would significantly change that labor line. And the only way to cover that, there's only two ways to cover that. You either eliminate labor, which is certainly what we don't want to see, eliminate jobs, or significantly raise prices. So those are the two things we're watching. I mentioned the media, so we continue to get just tremendous earned media. And we'll be, of course, pushing all that. And then that'll be out on our social media so people can see these stories. And many of these stories include bartenders and servers telling their very personal story on this and why they do not want to see this happen. Todd and I have been working very closely with what we call the big business across the state, these big statewide groups that we're in lockstep with, Chamber of Commerce, the NFIB, the Farm Bureau, retail merchants, all have, of course, very deep concerns on this entire ballot initiative as we push forward. The National Restaurant Association is totally in lockstep with us, and they've been working with us on every step, because they're watching this and participating in these fights in other states at the same time. Our first big push on this is to talk to the left side of this slide to everybody that's within the industry. Andy mentioned 564,000 people that work directly in this industry. So that's what we're pushing on first, to make sure everybody in our industry is up to speed on this risk and in lockstep with us. When we go to our more public campaign, which Todd mentioned, we know we'll need to try to get about 3 million people to understand it and be supportive of the position that we're taking on this, because we think right around 6 million people will vote this year in a presidential election year. So we need to get 3 million and one to be with us. So like any good plan, we have a lot of detailed timelines placed around all this. We're really in sort of that phase 2 of building resources, and we'll talk just a little bit more about this. The signatures are due July 3rd, and that's when we'll know whether they have enough signatures to kind of move forward with this. We do have a plan to take a look at all those signatures to make sure they're valid. And you'll hear a little bit more about that, but that'll push us all the way out. And then in phase 3 of the campaign, which will be a much more public campaign, where we'll be talking more directly to voters. We have all things that we're going to be moving on going forward. I will turn it back to Todd to talk for just a minute about a very important thing we're working on, Senate Bill 256. And Todd, you up to speed again? You back on?
I am back, yes. Mentioned Senate Bill 256. That is a bill by Senator Blessing, and what it is it is a slower, more measured path to $15 an hour over just 14 months. It's a 4-year path to $15 an hour, but importantly maintains the tipped wage, and we testified on that yesterday. We believe both that it's interesting when I'm out in other parts of the state. Sometimes I'll have people say, well, like, why does everybody's paying more than 15? Shouldn't we just be for that? And I'll say, when I'm out traveling, there aren't a lot of people that I see $10.45. But when you get in smaller communities all over Ohio, and especially smaller businesses, and especially those at the very beginning of their career, or what I almost say, just learning to work, there are a lot of people paying $12.50, $13 an hour. And $15 that fast is just too fast. But if we could change the conversation that it could be 15, but in a time frame that would not devastate Ohio's smaller businesses and smaller communities while maintaining the tipped wage, that's something we are for and we believe could change the conversation in November. So we had our first official hearing that we testified at yesterday. So you'll start to see a little bit more about that going forward.
Hey, Todd, you might talk too about, you had two other people testify, and it was really powerful.
Yes. So when we testified yesterday, we had Steve Butcher, who owns the restaurant in Pataskala, which is a family business. I knew his dad when his dad owned the business. He and Steve and his wife bought the business. In fact, he was just telling me yesterday, they bought it in 2019, just before COVID hit, and they managed to survive through that and are now doing okay. But man, they feel like this would just be a killer to them. And he says at his doesn't serve alcohol and really more of a breakfast and lunch place. And he has servers at the very low end, which are primarily just high school students earning $22 an hour, and at the top end earning $30, $35 an hour. And then Matt Schmidt, who's with Schmidt's here in Columbus, another iconic fifth generation business. And those are the ones we think would really be devastated if this were to go through.
And we have just literally hundreds and thousands of those everywhere across Ohio. Those are just two that, you know, we're nearby and could do the testimony for us. So thank you, Todd, for pulling that together. I'll just talk about a few additional next steps that we have. One is that we do have an impact study coming that's underway right now, and we'll have that in June. And this will be an impact study to what would be the impact of this massive increase so fast in the minimum wage and the elimination of tip credit, looking at what's happened in other states across the United States, other jurisdictions, and then specifically the impact on Ohio. We will be releasing that in June, and that's to offset some of the information that's out there by the opposition, which is already out of date, we believe not accurate. And so we just need to make sure that there's accurate data out there. So that's coming, and of course we'll talk about that. Todd, you want to talk about the fundraising a little bit?
Yeah, so of course, all of that we are doing do cost money. We are raising money specifically for advocacy. And we did hold our first official advocacy fundraiser for 2024 on these education efforts, hosted by Cameron Mitchell and his team at Cameron Mitchell Restaurants. It was both successful in terms of the dollars we raised and in our ability to just educate more people. So it's one thing, and we'll talk about this on the next slide of, you know, what are ways people can get involved, but giving to advocacy efforts is an important part of this.
Hey, Todd, why don't you wrap it up?
So I said that we were going to end on what can we all do. Today you were here, you got a little bit more educated, and those that will be watching this recorded, you've begun getting educated. So please communicate the facts about this threat to your industry peers, to your employees, to your suppliers, to your customers. You know, it's very important. We cannot do all of the to grow the Army. So get out there, communicate about it, and use the resources that we're making available. At our website, Protect Tips Ohio, it is not a static website. Every time we get some new good information that's helpful, we put it up there. So you don't have to be an expert on all parts of this. You just have to be able to say, this is a threat. This would be problematic for my business, for my community. Here's where you go to learn a little bit more. And that QR code will take you there, or just remember, protecttipsohio.com. And then, as Andy said at the beginning, if you're a hospitality business, you should join and engage with the ORHA. If you're not a hospitality business, I always tell everybody you should belong to your industry's trade association, and you should belong to your local chamber of commerce. Those are the bare minimum that everybody should do to get involved, and you should give to the advocacy of those organizations that you belong to.
I think it's a dynamic deal, right, Todd? I mean, you really, you support your local chamber because that's where some level, and it's really great for all business. And then, whatever your trade association, because we're doing all this flyover, trying to, like we did during the pandemic. We fought like crazy for everybody, in the hospitality industry. That weren't really members, but we did it anyways. Now they're joining. Andy came in with these ideas from his, obviously pursuing that. We have over craft brewers now members of ours. We have coffee shops joining. ice cream stores, which was my strategy to make sure we have more ice cream stores that are members. And Lauren is really, you have the donut category, right? Is that what you're working on?
Always. Anything that regarding something sweet.
Right.
Yeah.
I've introduced her to Eight Sisters, Cindy. Are you familiar with Eight Sisters right off the exit in Mount Gilead?
I am not. That's a little bit farther for me. That's down what, 71? Just passed through there yesterday. I was at the yesterday.
It is worth it. Next time you the coordinates on it. I took her there and I couldn't get her out. We had to be at a meeting, right? And I said, come on. So,
I said we can be late. It's fine. We're getting donuts. I don't see the problem here. It's stopping by. They've had their blueberry there wasn't a coffee cake. I can't think fritter. Oh my goodness. So good. It's 10 out of 10 there. So 100% recommend stopping by.
she wouldn't talk to us for an hour if she was enjoying that. But
That is true. And if you know me, I don't shut up. So it's impressive. Just shove food in my mouth and we're good.
We have to be, we're foodies in this industry. So thank Todd, Andy for taking a bite through everything, and Lauren. This is the QR code to take you to our main website. Everything is there. We keep updating that regularly. We're going to put some more of these stories of these individual operators out there, and Todd was able to get, I think, 12 operators to provide testimony, which we'll take those and those out on our website. So more and more people can understand this is not some big business that's pushing for this, right? This is not, although McDonald's and Wendy's and others are very concerned, about the industry by rapidly changing the minimum wage, this is top operators in all 88 counties of Ohio who are speaking on this, right? And speaking against an outside group that's trying to change something in Ohio. So we hope this was helpful, and that people, continue to join the initiative. We have all summer and fall, tell more of this, but having your partnership on this, Cindy, and your entire team is very, very appreciative, and we thank you for that. I know most people are kind of listening, people are driving, and all these calls, but if there are questions, we have a few more. We'll be happy to take any, or you can put them in, I guess you can put them in the chat if you have a question.